Hello and welcome back to J.P.'s World of Wrestling. I am your man J.P. and today we actually conclude the series on the Galoob wrestling figures. We conclude it because today we're going to talk about the last one that I have. There's still one out there that I haven't got yet that I still want to get at some point. But for now, we're just going to talk about this. Now, I saved this one for last because this is probably, in my opinion, one of the greatest wrestling figures of all time. And of course, it's the Nature Boy, Ric Flair. I always got a kick out of Ric Flair. I like Ric Flair. But in my opinion, this is the definitive Ric Flair action figure. Let's compare, shall we? This is the Hasbro Ric Flair. This is the Galoob Ric Flair. Good. Bad. Yes. No. I'm going to put this monstrosity aside. Anyway, Ric Flair. Ric Flair has such an extensive career. It's impossible for me to talk about his entire career right here in this video. So I'll just talk about a few notable feuds that I remember from WCW. One of the most notable, of course, was Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, and he had some what has been considered some really classic matches against Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Now, as a kid, I wasn't as much of a fan of those types of matches because I was a kid and I couldn't really sit for too long. So, like these 45-minute, hour-long marathon matches, I didn't have any patience for them. Which is why I think I was more of a WWF fan, because their matches were a lot shorter, a lot quicker, but long enough to where you felt like you really got a value out of watching them, but short enough to where you're not just like, oh, okay, fine, just end it already. But no, Ric Flair had what's considered like these big epic matches with Ricky the Dragon Steamboat for the title. I think they probably exchanged the title back and forth a couple times, but Ric Flair, he also had feuds with, Terry Funk and with Sting and with the Great Muta. Those are some like matches that I remember seeing Ric Flair in WCW. And and they were all really good. I think Ric Flair also at one point probably wrestled Vader. But Ric Flair also had a big feud with Hulk Hogan. When Hulk Hogan came over to WCW, him and Hulk, had a big feud, and they had this big epic match at Bash at the Beach. And I remember that distinctly. I didn't watch it live on pay-per-view. I watched it years later on pay-per-view, but you can watch it on the network. It's available on the network. But to me, that was like one of the most epic wrestling matches ever. And WCW actually knew what they had when Hulk came to WCW. They knew that was a big money-making match, putting Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan, these two huge icons, in the ring together. That was going to mean money. That was going to mean bucks. That was going to put butts in seats, and it did. And from that point on, Ric Flair, of course, one of the prominent and premier members of the Four Horsemen. I think the original Horsemen was Rick, Arn, Ole Anderson, and Tully Blanchard. But eventually Tully Blanchard left, and then I think he was replaced by probably Barry Windham, and then, Sid was gone, or Sid joined, and eventually the Horsemen reformed in the late 90s, and it was Rick, it was Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and Steve Mongo McMichael. And I just remember those guys. And Arn Anderson was there, but mostly just at ringside because he'd had surgery and it left him, unable to use his left hand, unable to wrestle. So Arn Anderson's role in the company was mostly just for support of the Four Horsemen and being at ringside. Eventually, on occasion, he still would get involved in the matches. But Ric Flair, when he won the World Championship, eventually he had a big argument with WCW um, president or whatever, Jim Herd. He didn't agree with Jim Herd, so he left WCW with the world title, and he went to the WWF. And he not really teamed up, but he was sort of managed by Bobby Heenan. I think that was probably the last guy that Heenan probably managed, but um, Heenan and Bobby he wasn't really at ringside as much with Rick because at that point Heenan had kind of taken on the role as commentator, broadcaster, so he wasn't really. I don't think he like maybe officially managed Ric Flair, but he was like the biggest mouthpiece for Rick in the WWF. But Rick had Mr. Perfect in his corner as his executive consultant, and Mr. Perfect would use chairs when the ref wasn't looking. He would hand Rick stuff in his hand so Rick could use a foreign object and stuff, and helped. He actually helped Rick win the WWF title the first time. Actually, no, he didn't, because Rick won the title in the Royal Rumble, so that wouldn't have been Mr. Perfect. But I think the second time he helped him. But Ric Flair had this epic match. I think it was WrestleMania 8 when he took on the Macho Man Randy Savage. And that's when Mr. Perfect really looked like kind of really a stiff shot in the knee with a steel chair on Macho Man. And Macho Man really sold it. I mean, Macho Man did a really good job of selling that leg injury. But he eventually ended up, rolling up Mr. Perfect or Rick for a small package and got the 3 count. Won the title from Ric Flair. Ric Flair eventually, though, won the title back from Macho Man. But then Ric Flair eventually lost the WWE title for the last time against Bret the Hitman Hart, and I think that was a house show, but they caught it on, or it might not have been a house show. It might have been like a wrestling challenge, or I don't think it was a pay-per-view. But eventually Rick lost the title to Bret, and then he was in the Royal Rumble in '93. Didn't do as well in '93 as '92, but the next night Ric Flair lost a loser leave town match to Mr. Perfect. And so since he lost to Mr. Perfect, obviously he was out of there. He went back to WCW to have an epic second run at WCW. But then eventually in the early 2000s, Ric Flair came back to WWE, and he came back sort of as like the storyline where he was kind of part owner with Vince McMahon, where Vince's kids sold their rights to the company to Rick, making him part owner, whatever. But then, Vince tried to bring back the NWO, and Rick got in a feud with Vince, saying, "Oh, don't bring in these guys; they're poison to the company." Those I've dealt with these guys; they're nothing but trouble. And so, but eventually Rick got back in the ring, and he had another big epic run in WWE in the early 2000s. And I think he retired sort of officially in 2008 at WrestleMania 24, I believe, where he had a match with Shawn Michaels, and Shawn Michaels sort of ended his career. Shawn Michaels did Sweet Chin Music, got the pin, 1, 2, 3. It was over for Rick. Because before that, maybe a month before that, Vince McMahon came out on Raw and told Rick, because Rick announced that he was never going to retire. He was just going to keep going and going and going forever until he died. So Vince McMahon came out. It's like, Rick, you will, continue going. But I'm telling you, as the owner of this company, as the chairman and CEO of this company, the next time you lose a match will be your last match. So every match from here on out could be a possible retirement match. So as long as you keep winning, you can stay. But next time you lose, you're out of here. So Rick had a few more matches on pay-per-views, and he won those. But then they built up this drama for WrestleMania 24, where he handpicked Shawn Michaels to be his opponent at WrestleMania. And then Shawn Michaels like, "No, come on, Rick, I don't want to end your career." And Ric Flair's like, "Well, who says you're going to end my career? Who says you're going to win? I'm the Nature Boy, and I say I can beat you." So they had this match at WrestleMania. And I remember distinctly because I remember seeing Shawn Michaels mouth the words, "I'm sorry, I love you. Then he did Sweet Chin Music. Shawn Michaels covered the 1, 2, 3. That was it. That was it for Ric Flair's in-ring career. Of course, Ric Flair then went to TNA, and he did have a few more in-ring matches. And then, I think it was last year, they did a pay-per-view called Ric Flair's Final Match, where Ric Flair was in a tag team match with his son-in-law against Jeff Jarrett and I think Jay Lethal, maybe. I don't know. But anyway, from what I didn't see it, but from what I hear, it wasn't the best match. Ric Flair looked winded. And I don't know. I didn't see it, so I don't really know. But nevertheless, this is a great, great figure. I love this action figure. To me, probably one of the greatest wrestling figures ever. Because of the pose. It's like the perfect pose. It's like the perfect pose where if you want to do, chops to the chest, or that kind of Ric Flair style punch, or the low blows, or the back suplexes, the you know the back suplex, and then of course the figure four. This is the figure four that we use for those of us who grew up in a generation where we used our imagination. This is the figure four. But anyway, the Nature Boy Ric Flair. And just to review, good, bad, yes, no. Wrestling figure, garbage. Anyway, sorry. Anyway, the Nature Boy Ric Flair Galoob. Love it. And that is going to conclude the Galoob series. And I hope that you have enjoyed watching these. If I acquire Butch Reed, I'll certainly add it to the collection and I'll show you Butch Reed and I'll review the Butch Reed figure. But until that time, that's going to conclude the Galoob series. So if you're new here, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share the video on social media if you want. And I will see you next time.